Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating story about survival, extreme isolation, and a pretty radical transformation. We're going to unpack exactly how a deeply traditional, historically isolated kingdom tucked away in the high Himalayas deliberately transformed itself into a carbon-negative democracy. It's a place that actively pushes back against the modern world's obsession with endless economic growth, and instead, well, they opted for a completely different set of values.
Okay, here is the roadmap for the journey we're taking today. 1. The Last Shangri-La. 2. Forging the Thunder Dragon. 3. A Gifted Democracy. 4. Gross National Happiness. And 5. Modern Pressures and Climate.
Section 1. The Last Shangri-La. Before we really get into Bhutan's incredible history, I want you to take a second and ask yourself a question. How exactly does a country measure its success? Think about how your own society measures progress. Is it purely through wealth, industry, building more things? Or is there another way to look at it? Bhutan is actually the first country to wholly adopt a policy of ecological preservation as the absolute cornerstone of its national identity. And in doing so, they kind of force the rest of us to reconsider what national success actually looks like. Get this, 72%. That is the amount of Bhutan's land that remains strictly under forest cover. And that is definitely not an accident. It's a profound, deeply ideological commitment to preservation that makes them a total global outlier. See, unlike other nations that might leverage their forests for carbon trading, the uniqueness of Bhutan's carbon sink is that it exists simply because the country refuses to deforest. It is literally a biodiversity hotspot, harboring super rare species like the snow leopard and the red panda. Now, to understand how they managed to preserve all of this, you have to look at their extreme geography. We're talking towering Himalayan peaks over 7,400 meters up in the north, plunging all the way down to just 160 meters in the southern subtropical foothills. This drastic shift in elevation didn't just create stunning biodiversity fed by monsoons, it provided a literal, formidable physical barrier. These massive mountains acted like natural fortress walls, aiding the nation's historical isolationism under the Wangchuck dynasty and keeping unwanted external influences out for centuries.
Section 2. Forging the Thunder Dragon.
So, human civilization here? It absolutely did not start out as some peaceful, flawless retreat. It was a serious struggle to take possession of this super rugged land. It all began over 7,000 years ago with the Proto-Noi people. Later on, Proto-Mongoloids arrived through the eastern passes, bringing iron tools that made them expert craftsmen. They started clearing forests for agriculture, and crucially, they built bastions inside those forests just to protect themselves from wild beasts. That architectural genius eventually evolved into these impregnable fortresses built high into inaccessible cliffs, some of which are still standing today as shrines.
But the real turning point for modern Bhutan hit in the 17th century with this figure, the Zhabdrung. Honestly, what a title. It translates to "he who wields the thunderbolt." Namlong Namgyel was a Tibetan monk, a scholar, and a master artist who faced the massive challenge of consolidating these very disparate, fiercely independent regions. And he did it by masterfully combining Buddhist teachings with actual martial action, forging political alliances, and setting up a whole network of monastic fortresses right across the country. Following the foundation laid down by the Zhabdrung, the Wangchuck monarchy stepped up with an incredibly intense strategy for survival. They set up a dual system of government, basically shared between monks and kings. The monarchy was incredibly politically astute, ruling with strategic subservience to the monastic authorities. But make no mistake, they also exercised brutal internal pacification when they had to. History shows that significant blood was shed through execution and invasion just to maintain order. By keeping their people safe behind thick screens of monks in those impenetrable mountain walls, they successfully fought off British and Gorkha encroachment, surviving 350 years through this fascinating blend of cultural preservation and total defensive isolation.
Section 3. A Gifted Democracy.
This next transformation is just an incredibly rare historical phenomena. We're talking about a beloved monarchy that essentially gifted democracy to its people, from the top down. Look at this timeline. In 1998, the fourth king kicked off far-reaching political reforms, literally voluntarily relinquishing his executive powers. By 2006, the fifth king ascends to the throne, and then in 2008, Bhutan enacted a brand new constitution and held its very first parliamentary elections. It was a peaceful, deliberate pivot away from centuries of feudalism.
Now, naturally, when you transition a country that has only ever known absolute rule into a democracy practically overnight, people are going to have questions. But, as one political leader quipped when asked if this new democracy would actually prevail, well, it is like asking whether the sun will rise ever again in the east. The expectations for this peaceful transition were sky high. The foundations were solid, sure, but the nation was staring down a mountain of internal and external challenges as it finally stepped out of isolation and into this brand new era of democratic governance.
Section 4. Gross national happiness. This right here is the brilliant contrast at the very heart of Bhutan's worldview. While the rest of the globe is basically obsessed with gross domestic product, measuring success strictly through industrial output, economic expansion, mass consumption, Bhutan intentionally prioritizes gross national happiness. G&H argues that true development has to balance economic growth with holistic well-being, ecological conservation, and cultural continuity.
And listen, this wasn't just some nice philosophical idea to print on a brochure. It became the actual law of the land. The very first law promulgated by the new government back in 2008 declared G&H as the supreme goal of national development. By writing this directly into law, Bhutan pushed back really hard against Western-style neoliberal economics. Though, as you can probably imagine, defining, measuring, and actually upholding this happiness in the face of modern globalism, that remains an incredibly complex task for Bhutanese policymakers today.
Section 5. Modern pressures and climate. Because right now, Bhutan is facing some massive internal and external threats. There's this huge rural-to-urban migration happening, with young people flocking straight to the capital city, Thimphu. That leads to clogged cities and a high level of under-occupation among the educated youth. This rapid modernization really threatens to dilute cultural traditions, and it's even pushing historical languages toward extinction. Plus, despite high social media usage, there's a real lack of strategy regarding the global digital economy. And on a purely physical level, the country is facing immediate, severe dangers from a warming planet, specifically the terrifying emergent threat of glacial lake outburst floods literally sweeping away vital infrastructure.
And here is the deeply tragic irony of that climate threat. 2.36 billion tons. That is the amount of carbon dioxide Bhutan's vast forests absorb every single year. Despite being one of the absolute least contributors to climate change globally and pledging to remain carbon neutral forever, Bhutan is somehow among the most vulnerable countries to its devastating impacts.
So how do they fight back against these pressures and hold on to their identity? The government enforces incredibly strict, almost unheard-of development policies. While maintaining that mandatory 72% forest cover, they actually cap real estate development at a maximum of just 10% of the land. 10%! This is all done to ensure the holistic harmony of nature. It's a totally different mindset. While Western planners are over here measuring time and financial quarters, Bhutanese philosophers literally frame their development timelines in pragmatic units of human generations.
All of which leaves us with this final, vital question. Can the last Shangri-La survive the 21st century? As globalism accelerates, as youth aspirations naturally shift, and as climate change dramatically alters their physical landscape, can Bhutan's deliberate, fragile balance of ancient tradition, top-down democracy, and gross national happiness actually weather the storm? It is a political and social experiment unlike literally anything else on Earth, and the whole world is watching to see what happens next. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.